Good evening. Last night we spoke of the unillumined mind and the illumined mind. And this is probably the most important subject that I have ever come upon in spiritual work or spiritual living. Probably the thing that has prevented harmony, peace on earth in individual and collective experience more than any other one thing is the belief that there is a God somewhere that can give it to us. There is no God, either in heaven or on earth, that can give us peace on earth, or health, or happiness, or any other form of good. If there was such a God, in the thousands of years in which people have found thousands of ways to pray to God, God would have been more evident in the history of people. However, history shows us that civilizations have come and civilizations have gone. Civilizations have come and worked up into mighty peoples and in time disappeared. And great nations have become little nations. Very often small nations become very large ones, but only for a time. Why? Because actually, if there is to be any change in our experience, individually or collectively, it will only come about through the development of our own consciousness. Now, we can prove that, if proof were necessary, in the experience of the many, many people who, through the development of their own consciousness, have come to a place of God realization and have found harmony, wholeness, and completeness coming into expression in their lives. And, of course, we can look out at the world and bear witness to the fact that it is a world that is living like the branches that is cut off from the tree and withereth. Now, before we can be terribly interested in the fate of the world, we must become interested in our own fate. In other words, as we discover that which brings harmony, peace into our own lives, then we know what it is that will do it for the entire world. But just to be anxious because the world seems to be on its path of destruction again, just to be concerned because the world may come to an end, to be concerned because we don't know how long the dollar or the bonds will be worth anything, all of this is a waste of time and a waste of energy unless we have something to contribute that might change the course of history for the better. We never will know this until we start with our individual experience. And if we can find a way of bringing wholeness into our own lives, if we can find a way of bringing happy human relationships, if we can find a way of making our supply independent of what the rest of the world is doing, then we will be able to say, now there is a way that I can teach my children or my neighbors. In the experience of Moses, we have an ordinary human being, a man spending years as a shepherd, a man of no renown, no repute, no reputation for accomplishing anything at all in the world beside being a shepherd. And then we have his experience of meeting God face to face, and then becoming the leader of the Hebrew people and the one chosen to lead them out of slavery. And now watch what happens. If you can visualize the land of Egypt with one of the most powerful governments and one of the most powerful forms of government ever on earth, with these people in complete slavery, uneducated, slave labor, living at probably the lowest level of human life, and imagine that one man, one individual, was able to break that yoke of Pharaoh. One individual was able to break the power of that government and lead those people out of Egypt. But he did more. There were thousands and thousands of these people, and they all had to be fed, and they all had to have water, and they all had to have the necessities of human existence. And this one man, through his own enlightened consciousness, was able to provide food for them when they needed it, water when they needed it, safety when they needed it, security when they needed it, regardless of the need that appeared on that journey. Moses, one man of illumined consciousness, was and able to fulfill every need. As you trace the major prophets of the Old Testament, you will also find the nature of their demonstration to be the demonstration of their own state of consciousness. Elijah, chased out into the woods and the wilderness by his own people, a fugitive, alone, hunted, in a strange land with strange people and enemy people. Nevertheless, Elijah was able to find his food when he needed it, his drink when he needed it. He was not only able to take care of himself, he was able to take care of a widow and her son too, all through the activity and light of his own consciousness. You might say the ravens brought him food. And of course, this may appear to be true, but it isn't. It was his own consciousness of supply that appeared outwardly as ravens bringing food. We read that cakes were baked on the stone in front of him. In other words, they materialized out of the air. But it isn't true. Nothing happens out here in space ever. Everything that happens out here is a projection of consciousness. And therefore, if there were cakes baked on the stones, be assured of this, It was Elijah's consciousness of supply appearing outwardly as that form. In much the same way, there is no love in this room, and there is no hate in this room. If there is to be love expressed between us, it must be the activity of our consciousness coming out into active expression. Otherwise, there'll be no love here, for this room hasn't any. On the other hand, we can just as well have a fight here. We can just as well have hate and discord. All we need is that state of consciousness to project itself, so that as you follow this line of the unillumined mind and the illumined, the material and the spiritual, you will find that every experience that comes to us in life is an expression or manifestation of our state of consciousness. Now, if we have a consciousness of love, it means we are expressing love. Then, love is that which comes back to us as a reflex action of what we send forth. In other words, the bread that we cast upon the water, that is the bread that comes back to us. And if we do not cast our bread upon the water, there is no bread to come back to us. As ye sow, so shall ye reap. With what measure ye measure, it will be measured unto you. Now, in the light of this, we as truth students must realize that we are not dealing with a world out here. We are not dealing with any God or any person who can do something to us or for us. We are dealing with our own state of consciousness, and we can always be sure that that which goes out from us is the measure that comes back to us. Therefore, if we continue to sow to the flesh, we will reap corruption. If we sow to the Spirit, we will reap life everlasting. Meaning, if we continue to believe that our good is in matter, whether it's the flesh of the body or whether it is the form of money or securities or property, if we believe and if we continue to have our faith in that which is already externalized, that is the kind of corruption we will eventually sow. Whereas, in proportion as we realize that the Spirit of God in me is my daily bread, the Spirit of God in me is the cement of my human relationships, the Spirit of God in me is the love that flows out. It isn't true that I love anybody, and it really isn't true that you love anybody. It is only true that we are willing to let God love through us by withholding hate, envy, jealousy, malice, criticism, condemnation. As we withhold our own propensity for judging, we enable the Spirit of God in us to flow forth to everyone as love, whether or not they deserve it. We have no right to question what benefit people receive from us or through us, or whether they deserve it or not, for that does not lie within our power. It is their consciousness that is drawing unto them either the corruption of the flesh or the life eternal of the Spirit. And if they are sowing to the Spirit, it is very possible that they will draw their good through us. Now, we come to the Master, and we find a most remarkable situation. He is able to heal the sick. He is able to give sight to the blind. He is able to give hearing to the deaf. He is able to heal the multitudes and to feed the multitudes and to have 12 baskets full left over. And remember, he had no storehouses or bonds. He had no checking accounts. He had no side pockets full of money. And yet, he could feed, he could clothe, he could heal. Now remember, there were lots of other people in the Holy Lands. There were lots of other rabbis. There were men much higher in the church than he. But of all those, he alone could do these things. Why? Because of his developed consciousness. Now, to prove it, he picks out 12 disciples, as unlikely a lot of spiritual healers and disciples as can be imagined. Fishermen, tax collectors. And in a short time, they are healing. They are preaching. They are showing the light of the Spirit to others. How? By their developed consciousness. Later we find 70 and then 200. And they begin to do healing works. They begin to bring in new members to the fold. Through what? Through their developed consciousness. And so it is that we find that the good that comes into a person's experience is in direct proportion to the degree of spiritual development of their own consciousness. It is not the act of a God somewhere. When the Master said, "Rise, pick up thy bed," he said nothing about God doing it. When he opened the eyes of the blind, he said nothing about God doing it. When he raised Lazarus, he said, "I do not even have to pray to God." That ought to be a tip-off for everybody. In other words, it isn't a God somewhere doing it. It is the degree of God realization of an individual. If one's consciousness can be developed to that degree of the Master's, then we would have more people healing multitudes, feeding multitudes, and leading them into the higher life. But if we can't have anyone of that high degree, then we will take whatever degree is available to us and do the best we can with it. But always we must remember what we're doing, that we are not looking out here to God to keep peace with us in this room. No, ma'am, and no, sir. We are looking to the love that we wish to have expressed through our own consciousness, and then we find that it is the power and the presence of God for which we are an outlet, for which we are the instruments. Now that brings to a very important point. All over this world, there are groups meeting to pray for world peace. And this has been going on since long before the American Revolution. There's no use to pray to God for peace, individually or collectively, because God only has entrance to this world through consciousness. No other way. There has to be an illumined consciousness to serve as the inlet and outlet for the Spirit of God which performs the mighty works. In other words, there had to be a Moses. And through his developed consciousness, he could perform everything necessary for the people in his charge. There had to be a Jesus. God couldn't have operated in the Holy Lands just by shining down out of the sky in the air. There had to be a Jesus who is the inlet and the outlet, the instrument through which God's grace can reach mankind. And it was that consciousness of Jesus which lifted these fishermen and tax collectors above their level of consciousness into that of disciples. And in turn, it was perhaps their state of consciousness which took other 70 and lifted them from fishermen or tax collectors and made them healers, and so on. There must be consciousness. In the experience of metaphysicians, you will find that if you have access to a practitioner or teacher who is doing fine healing work, that the fine healing works come through. And if you are in another organization where there are no good practitioners or teachers, the whole thing goes downhill. In other words, I have witnessed this, that there are some churches that have practitioners and teachers of high spiritual consciousness, and those churches flourish, and wonderful healings take place, and probably a mile or two away is a branch of the same church ready to fold up with the same teaching. Now, we have that in every one of the metaphysical movements, that there are individual branches or churches or institutes which flourish, and then there are those that gradually fade away. Why? Why? If you're going to look to a God, God should be the same in all of these. Or, if it is just the teaching, then the works in each one should be the same. But then there's the secret. It isn't a God, and it isn't the teaching. It is the consciousness of the individuals who are responsible, and that goes from the minister or readers all the way down through the boards and the Sunday school teachers and the committees. If a church or center hasn't got a group of developed spiritual workers, that church has very little chance of flourishing, except that if it has one minister who can carry the whole load, it will be carried for a while. Not permanently, because no one individual can carry the world in their arms. Even the Master said, if I go not away, the Comforter cannot come to you. Now, always, and this applies not merely in healing work, this applies in your business, your art, or your profession. You will attain skill and ability in your own chosen field in accord with the degree of spiritual development that you attain. In other words, the attaining of individual spiritual consciousness flows forth as a bridge builder, a mathematician, artist, musician, or any other form of human endeavor. Now, the burden then rests on our shoulders. We could take a little community like this church, and we would have to start with the one on the platform. And we would have to know this, that if the man or woman on the platform were absolutely devoted to the spiritual ministry, to the life of a dedicated person, then their consciousness would be so completely filled with God and with love and with dedication to their work that you would have harmony in the congregation and among the workers. Ah, yes, but it is not to be expected that one individual will make the entire demonstration of an organization. Therefore, there must be a measure of dedication on the part of all of those who are entrusted with any part of the work. Then you'll find what? Then you'll find people being attracted and drawn, they know not why, but you will know. Where two or more are gathered together in dedication to the principle, to love, to God, to spirit, to truth, that is bound to be felt all over the community and far out into the world. Now, take the same place and let that dedication drop down to a human level, and then you will find the attending lack of attendance or support or supply or healings, because no one's humanness heals or consoles or comforts or supplies or forgives. It is only the degree of their spiritual consciousness. And that is given to us by the Master in this teaching. And this is why each one of us must learn it. The Master is seated at the well with the woman of Samaria. And he offers her to drink. And she reminds him that he hasn't a bucket to draw water with. And then he tells her that you can drink that water and thirst, but I have water that I can give you that will become eternal life. The disciples, soon after that, come to him, and they're alarmed because he has let the lunch hour go by and he hasn't eaten. Shall we go to the city and get you some meat? I have meat that ye know not of. I am the bread, the wine, and the water. I am the resurrection. I am the life. And so we come to that part of the teaching which will give us the greatest amount of spiritual unfoldment and spiritual light when we begin to ponder the meaning of those passages. What did the Master mean when he said, I have meat that ye know not of? I can give you water without a bucket. I am the meat, the wine, and the water. I am eternal life. You will begin to note that the kingdom of God is within you. And all of the meat and all of the wine and all of the water that you will ever need, past, present, or future, is at this very instant within you. Within you. And you can give in your meditation, in your silence, more food than any individual will need for a whole day. More drink, more satisfaction, more peace, more health, more harmony. Not by what you have, not by what you do, but what you inwardly realize. I and my Father are one. And because of this, all that the Father hath is mine. And therefore come, eat and drink. Be fed. Be satisfied. Be healed. Be refreshed. Be comforted. Be forgiven. Your consciousness of love and life and truth is this meat and wine and water, is this power of forgiveness, is this power of healing, is this power of restoration. Your consciousness is this when you are silent. Only when you are silent and can realize within yourself, and this is the most important part of the work in the spiritualizing, that is the enlightening of our own consciousness, is constantly dwelling in the fact not of what I need, not of what I would like to have or should have, but what I already am and have. I and the Father are one. All that the Father hath is mine. Embodied within the I that I am is all of the spiritual truth that has ever been known from everlasting to everlasting. Embodied within my consciousness is all of the life and all of the love that has ever been known from the beginning of time unto the end of the world. Within me is the kingdom of God. Come eat, come drink, come be healed, then be still. And this very stillness broadcasts itself to every individual who has contacted you. Not merely from within your own community, it can be from 10,000 miles away. Anyone who thinks of you, who even thinks your name, can instantly receive healing or comfort or forgiveness or grace in some form merely by thinking on you. Why? Because you are not living as if you were I, Joel. You are living as if you were I and the Father are one, and the Father is living my life. You see what that does to you? Eventually, it brings you to where you do not live your life for your own sake. Whatever it is that you have need of is taken care of by the Spirit of God. And therefore, you do not turn your attention to yourself, but rather impersonalize by living out from the standpoint of I and the Father are one. One time, a student came to me with the problem of lack. And from the conversation, it was evident that their entire thought and attention was on my supply and my insufficiency of supply or my lack of supply. And this brought a response from within me, so that I said, you are speaking of your supply as if you really could have any. And I wouldn't be surprised that that's the stumbling block. Somewhere it says, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Now what are you doing with supply, and what are you going to do with it? The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, and can't you be satisfied with that? Well, of course they couldn't for the time being, because that meant, yes, but what about me? What about mine? What about my rent? What about my this? To begin to understand that the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof is to lose all fear and concern about supply. Do you know that personalizing good is as dangerous to our demonstration as personalizing evil? In other words, this thing of trying to get my health, my supply, my happiness, my companionship, this is the very stumbling block to its demonstration. Why? Because God is no respecter of persons. And you might just as well ask God to send the sunlight to your garden, or the rain to your garden. To personalize a desire for sun or rain like that would surely act to cut you off from it. But to realize the universal nature of sunshine and rain, and the willingness to see it expressed, manifested in every part of the globe where it may be needed, and in every amount that may be needed, sets you free from personalizing good and believing that there is such a thing as getting good from God. There is no such thing. Otherwise, God would be channeling good to you or to me. God would be channeling health to me and leaving it away from my neighbor. There is no such thing. Understand that the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Intelligence is of God. Life is of God. Health is of God. Harmony is of God. There is no me or mine in health or wealth. There is only the infinite nature of God's harmony. But you can be assured of this, that if there is harmony in God, it is universally expressed. God is no respecter of persons. Once you begin to understand that God is the health of your countenance, but that doesn't mean your personal countenance, but it says your countenance, meaning the countenance of everybody who hears that statement. God is the health of your countenance, the countenance of every one of you, wherever you may be in time or space. God is the health. If God is the health, you haven't any. If God is supply, you haven't any. If God is a high tower, you haven't any. If God is your fortress, you haven't any. It is all God's. And then how consoling it is to remember, and son, all that I have is thine. Oh, how wonderful it is to place it all in God. Surrender everything to God. And then just remember, and all that the Father hath is mine. But this is a universal truth, not a personal one. It doesn't mean that all that the Father hath is mine because I belong to this race or this religion or this country. It doesn't mean that all the Father hath is mine because I pray standing up, or I pray sitting down, or I pray cross-legged. It has no such meaning. It really means that all that the Father hath is mine, is a universal truth. And it is the truth unto every spiritual being, all spiritual being. Why then do we not all have it equally? And there we come back to our basic premise. Because we have separated ourselves from the love of God. Because we have separated ourselves from the activity of God through ignorance, of course. We have personalized good, we have personalized evil, we have even prayed to a God to take pity on me. Why me? So many others in the world who deserve it more. Why me? Why you? Why anyone? And the answer is, learn this. Open yourselves to spiritual wisdom and learn that the kingdom of God is within you. But that when you say this, you are not talking only to truth students. You're not talking only to Christians. You're not talking only to the people of this, that, or the other race. You are talking universally when you say, all that the Father hath is thine. Then, if anyone doesn't open their consciousness to the receiving of it, they are the 1,000 that fall at this side and the 10,000 at that side. If they will not live and move and have their being in God, they're cutting themselves off from it. Now, there is only one reason that there is not peace on earth, and that is that there are very few people on earth who want peace on earth. They want peace in their particular part of the earth, or on the particular terms that they think peace should come on and with. But to have peace universally expressed, that would mean emptying out all of these overburdened warehouses that are allowing billions of dollars worth of food to rot. Why? Aren't there any hungry people in the world? Ah, yes, but if we give them this, it'll spoil them. Oh, yes, it'll make them independent. Oh, yes, it'll do something else to them. No, peace must first come to your individual consciousness, or you cannot give it to others. The Spirit of God must first dwell in your individual consciousness before it can flow out to bless others. Your individual consciousness must be illumined before it can heal and teach those who are seeking healing and teaching. All of life eventually comes to the subject of consciousness. Consciousness always comes to the point of its expression as an individual. One individual. Well, we were told that 10 righteous men could save a city. One individual spiritually endowed can form a religious teaching that will embrace hundreds of millions of people and bless them. One spiritually endowed person can create a healing ministry that becomes worldwide. Well, don't we have the experience of what Mrs. Eddy's ministry did in spreading the whole word of spiritual healing, and thereby setting up all these other organizations that have followed after, and now proving themselves to such an extent that all over the world the Protestant church is opening itself to the subject of spiritual healing. And remember, it all had its beginning in one demonstration, or the demonstration of one person. And out of that has come a whole new religious concept, a whole new healing concept. Never forget that. Everything that is good and right begins with an individual. Somebody has wonderfully said that no board of directors ever invented anything. And I'm sure that no board of explorers ever discovered anything or any place. It is an individual, and it is the light that comes through an individual that becomes the light to all of the individuals that touch their consciousness. So it is. Sometimes we have placed too much stress on demonstrating harmony, demonstrating health, demonstrating supply, demonstrating companionship, demonstrating a home, and even a parking place. Whereas all of these would naturally follow if we made the one supreme demonstration, and that is the demonstration of God. Now, as a human, we are nothing and can do nothing, and we can be nothing. But the very moment that we can demonstrate God, the very moment we can attain God realization, then the wholeness of God appears outwardly as form. It appears as abundance of every good thing. It appears as health. It appears as companionship. It appears as home. But actually, those are only the forms. The substance is invisible. All things that outwardly appear are really formed from invisible substance. And that invisible substance is your consciousness. Try to see that. Everything of which this world is formed is your consciousness. Yours alone? No. That would be personalizing. There is only one infinite consciousness, but it is yours. As long as you think of yourself as a human being with a mind of your own, or a spirit of your own, or a consciousness of your own, you cut yourself off from the infinite storehouse which the universal divine consciousness really is. When you begin to acknowledge this infinite consciousness, which is God, is manifested as my individual consciousness, then you will find that your consciousness becomes the substance of your dollars, or of your home, or of your business, or of your profession, or your art. Your consciousness, the invisible, appears visibly. The consciousness of Moses appeared as what was his protection by day and the fire by night. The consciousness of Moses appeared as water. The consciousness of Moses appeared as the opening of the Red Sea. The consciousness of Jesus Christ appeared as healing, as life, as sight, as hearing, as food. The consciousness of Jesus, the spiritual consciousness, the enlightened consciousness. He didn't have to go out here for it. It was his own consciousness appearing as. So it is. Everything in our experience individually is our own consciousness appearing. And the one way that we shut it off is looking out here and expecting somebody or some bodies to make our demonstration. Looking out here to circumstances or condition or people, or looking up there for a God. This cuts us off. When we begin to realize, Son, thou art ever with me, all that I have is thine, for we are one, then we know that God consciousness is my consciousness, and God consciousness is appearing as infinite good, infinite harmony, in my experience. Then we come back to the poet who says, and we must open out a way for the imprisoned splendor to escape. And indeed we must. Whether we start with pennies, nickels, or dimes to let it go out into impersonal channels, or whether we take some old clothes out of a clothing closet to give away, or whether we merely sit down to express God's grace to the world, but more especially to our enemies, to those who have despitefully used us, to those who have persecuted us. To sit down once a day and consciously forgive all those who have offended us. To sit down once a day to give love to this world. To forgive the sinner in the sense of, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. Neither do I condemn them regardless of what they're doing. I know the limited sense from which they're operating. So I have no condemnation, but Father, forgive them and open their consciousness to truth. In other words, love must flow out from us, not personally and not personal love. Love must flow out. Forgiveness must flow out. Prayer must flow out. Joy must flow out. And if someone comes to us hungry, it isn't enough just to give them a prayer. Let us also feed them. In other words, never believe for a moment that money is something separate and apart from God or consciousness, for money is actually one of those forms which your consciousness assumes, just as much so as home or friendships or companionships. Money is just one of these articles of exchange, absolutely necessary in human experience. No one yet has been found able to do without it. But to love it of itself, or to believe the power of it is in itself, is where we lose our demonstration. When we come to look upon money as merely one of those forms of outflowing consciousness, we will have money in its right place. And just in the same way, everything has its rightful place once we understand that it is our consciousness that is appearing as form. And if our consciousness is spiritual, the form is life eternal and abundance, with 12 baskets full left over. If our consciousness is material, finite, limited, it will appear outwardly as corrupt flesh. When it is spiritual, it appears outwardly as harmonious flesh, healthy flesh, youthful flesh. The great lesson, the greatest lesson that I've ever had in my work is the lesson of God manifest as individual consciousness, and then realizing that that is what makes all that the Father hath mine, for we have the same mind, we have the same consciousness, we have the same life, just one infinite one. And as I am willing to give, to share, to let it flow, it stays along spiritual lines and it manifests harmoniously in the world of form and effect. Thank you, Reverend, for the joy of sharing your platform. Thank you, all of you, for being with us in this experience, and I hope that a seed has been planted that will grow into a rich fruitage for all of you. Thank you.